On Detroit Pregame.com, Pregame Pro, Bryan Leonard, Wednesday, March 13th. Let's get right to the action. Bryan Leonard, Mr. Vegas himself, but for the last few weeks, which is funny, is considering RJ never takes a vacation. Bryan, I'm very envious. I am a baseball junkie. I had tons of fun in Punta Cana with the old lady, but I'm not going to lie. I was slightly envious of the fact that you were hanging out in spring training and experiencing that. So before we get to the handicapping part, any quick stories or any feedback from any baseball aficionados or fans of how much emphasis you'd maybe put on the fact if you're a fan you should experience spring training once in your life?
Yeah, it's great in Arizona because all the ballparks are within 45 minutes of each other. And I used to go to Florida. My parents are down in Orlando, and it would just take forever to drive everywhere. And the ones in the South Florida, you really couldn't even get to. So once the Indians moved over to Arizona, I started going out here. And we started off with 3 or 4 days. Then I went to a week. Now it was 2 weeks. And I'd really like to do a month. It's just not only is it nice and relaxing to get away from everything. In fact, I did very well with my basketball picks when I was in Arizona, so I didn't have any effect at all. In fact, it played my mind a little bit. But it's a great thing to do. And, one of the things you can do with spring training that you can't really do in anything else, you can actually go down and you can talk to some of the players, talk to the coaches, get there early. You can have conversations with them. I didn't use a press pass or anything for this. I didn't do anything with pregame, but it's something in the future I may do. And you get to see the guys, when the players, they go to practice. Usually, if you got a 1 o'clock game, they usually start practicing about 8:30 in the morning for a road game, 9:30 for a home game. And you get to see them watch them practice for a couple hours. And, they're always running in shifts, so you have time to talk to some of them if you want. But then at night, they usually go golfing or they go out and do what they want to do. And, in fact, one of your favorite players we happened to catch up to at a concert, Raul Ibanez. I talked to Marco into going to a concert, and I'm sitting there with Marco. I turn around, standing right next to Marco is Raul Ibanez, and I got a kick out of it because we were the only people in the entire place who even knew who he was.
Real quick is this is a great time because some of the questions for a few of the people that couldn't make it due to the time spot sent some questions. And this one is specifically on spring training. So since we have 30 minutes, I don't want to forget this. This comes from David Chang. He wants to know, Bryan, is there an edge to have in betting spring? Is there an edge in betting spring training? At least early in the spring season, it seems like the starters only play 4 to 5 innings, and the rest of the game is up to the backups, which could be extremely random. Is there any advantage to betting spring training, do you think, Bryan? And maybe for somebody, and I guess to give an example, like someone like, say, Dave Essler in college basketball, when I did the webinar before the season with him, he knew a lot of the obscure players on some of these teams. So the odds makers they don't know this stuff. I've talked to guys at the beginning of college basketball and even asked them, like, how do you come up with lines for these podunk schools that have new kids in? And they go basic power ratings and, go with God. So for these spring training games, and a lot of the books trying to be cool and put up the lines, what are some tips or any kind of edge that you can give anyone listening or who will listen to this on the archive for betting spring training?
Well, for myself, I've never bet spring training. I don't know how you really could because I want to get all the information I can and share any more on Twitter. There are people out there that will tell you what the pitching rotation is. These 5 guys are going. Well, that's good to know. The only problem is you don't know how long they're going to be going. You don't know what they're going to be working on. I usually try to go down the first week of March, which is basically the first or second week of spring training. I'm there to see the young players as opposed to the veterans. The veterans will start playing more as this season goes on in the preseason. I want to get a look at some of their younger players. That way, when they do get a call up as the season goes on, I know something about them. I know what they have. I saw them pitch against some other starters down in spring training, so I knew what they could do when they stepped up. So it's, a couple times I would even tweet out the starting lineup that they have posted at the stadium. That way everybody can take a look at it. The problem you have in spring training is you never know how long they're going to play. So early on when I'm there, I take more of a look at, one of the things that nobody ever talks about is how the teams get along with each other. Most of the times, since we're living in, and we're seeing it right now with the WBC, we're living in an era where the entire world is playing baseball. I want to sit there and I want to watch a team where they just don't have all the Latin players sitting together. I don't want to see all the U.S. players sitting together. I don't want to see the Japanese players sitting together. I want everybody around talking to each other. That tells me there's a good camaraderie there between these players. They get along well. So I think there'll be less tension as the year goes on because they're able to relate to each other. And that's a major problem you usually get when you get foreign-born players come to play in the United States. They can't communicate with anybody. I just saw a Japanese player. The only person he was talking to was his interpreter. Now, that can't be good for him getting along with the rest of the players in the clubhouse.
And that's something, being a Detroit Tiger fan, you see a lot. There's a lot of Latin players, but, Cabrera and, Cecil Fielder. Or not, I'm showing how much of a homer in my age right there. That's how old I feel. Fucking, I watched his dad. Prince Fielder, they bonded right away. A lot of the players, there's a lot of camaraderie, like you just said, and it's really an eclectic group, for somebody like the Tigers. So, for something like spring training, is there anything, whether it's, even if you're just reading the game recaps or, my friend Jeff's a total homer, and he actually will listen to the spring training games on the radio. Early on in the season, most people are just, MLB.com or what they see on ESPN, but being at the spring training games, or at least following them in detail as much as possible through a beat writer or whatever it may be, what are some main takeaways you think would benefit early in the season outside of what you just said?
I like to look at, and there's certain places that I have seen people tweet this out. You're trying to get a look at what the team really feels about these players. For example, they will break down each team and they'll break down their second baseman. Not only do they break down how many at-bats they got in spring training, they break down how many times this player batted in the first 3 innings, the second 3 innings, the third 3 innings, which is very important early on in preseason. If you've got a young player, he's playing a lot in the first 3 innings, second 3 innings, the team thinks a lot about him. They want to get a good look at him against Major League Baseball competition. If he's a guy like Francisco Lindor for Cleveland, their number 1 draft choice, every time I saw him play, he only played the ending of the game. Now, right now he's in single A, so it makes a lot of sense. But that tells me that he is not in the immediate plans to bring up to the Major League team because they're not bringing him in against Major League pitching in the first 3 or the second 3 innings. That way, for fantasy purposes, I know he's a couple years off. For purposes of saying, for the Cleveland Indians, I say, okay, well, he's out of the picture this year unless there's major injuries. I know who I'm going to get, who's going to play shortstop, who's the backup shortstop. And if they have to go to the minors, I know he won't be the first guy they pull out.
Before we get to the rest of the baseball, it's partly my company, my webinar, so I'm going to steal a little bit. It's March Madness. What are your thoughts right now for the conference tournaments going into the big dance? If I had to say right now, Brian, I'm going to give you half of whatever I win. I'm in a bracket pool that the winner gets $1 million. I just want you to pick my Final Four. Who are you picking for the Final Four, and who are you picking to win it all?
I like Florida. I know they struggled down the stretch, but I think they're all around one of the better teams in college basketball. I like Indiana. Now that Duke is healthy, I like Duke. Louisville's come on as of late, and they play great defense. I can see that being the Final Four, depending on what kind of matchups you get.
Yeah, I think my Michigan Wolverines are still too young. I mean, too young I think, to go through the whole tournament. So before we move on to baseball, okay, Brian, give me one, I guess, dark horse long shot. If I had to say, give me a pick that I want to hit a big score on, and I won't be pissed if they don't win. Who's your best long shot going into the tournament, you think, to look out for?
I like Colorado State. Colorado State's a great rebounding team. They're great in the half court. They've shown that they can play the up and down game like a UNLV or a San Diego State, and they are under the radar. It's a team that plays great defense, and not a lot of people know about them, so they may take them for granted. Right now the Mountain West is either number 1 or number 2 in the RPI this season. Still, a lot of people don't give them a lot of credit. And I don't think any of the teams in the league, other than Colorado State, can actually make it to the Sweet 16. But the Rams can surprise some people. I like teams that have good guard play and can rebound once they get into the tournament, and Colorado State has that.
All right. Before we get to some of your tips, Brian, I want to try to get some of these questions out because I think some of these questions are going to correlate to some of your thoughts. This one, and Scott, I know you said, I don't know if you're going to ask this, Johnny, so I'm going to ask this specifically because you tried to put me on the spot. Brian, I've skimmed this very surface of sabermetrics. My impression is it is very accurate at predicting certain occurrences, but once a game gets beyond the starting pitchers, it gets more and more difficult to use. However, it does appear to be a perfect tool if you're betting the first 5 innings or can do live wagering with relievers on the mound. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I think your first 5 innings has less randomness than if you play the full game. The bullpens, baseball's really been a lot different the last few years than before. It was always you had your starters, and anybody who wasn't good enough to be a starter was in the bullpen, and your best out of those guys was usually the closer. Well, now you've got certain guys that they know they have a certain role, 6th, 7th inning. So the bullpens are a little bit different than what they've been in the past. But you can take your best bullpen from one year, and it could be one of the worst the next year. The difference there is totally opposite of starting pitchers. Usually, if you got good starters, they're going to be good every year. I mean, take a look at the Atlanta Braves back when they had those aces. They were good each and every year. But the bullpen has a lot to do with it. And in fact, you're going to have certain games, certain days where your number, let's say your number 8 reliever pitched, 30 pitches each of the last two games. Well, he's not going to play tonight, which means everybody else is going to be in a little bit of a different role, and they may not be used to that role. So there's a lot of situations with the bullpens where you're not going to get the same guys pitching every night that you normally would. So the variance in the bullpen is definitely something you want to take a look at. So I'd agree. If your first 5 innings are probably the way you want to go to rule out some of that variance at the end of the game.
Speaking of pitching, this goes to the next question we have for you, Brian. Any undervalued teams or pitchers that you see to take advantage of early in the season? And, this is something that I know a lot of people do in football. I don't know how accurate it is, but people always say, like, the Super Bowl champ, fade them in the beginning of the year. Because a lot of the stuff, that, the public perception or, they're basing stuff off last year, especially when you look at, like, a marquee team that's going to be, like, overvalued, like a Yankees. Maybe not so much this year because, a lot of people are thinking this is going to be, the downward time for them. Going into this season and going to spring training, you're doing your homework already. Is there anybody going to the season that you think is undervalued? And we'll even say overvalued. I'll add a little bit to the question myself.
Yeah, a lot of it is already out in the media, so there's really not a lot to it. Scott Kazmir is back for Cleveland. I went to see him pitch the other day, and he looked really good, but he did tire in the 3rd inning. Normally, he would be a guy that I thought could get some bonus early on. He's right now he's penciling as the number 5 starter, so chances are he wouldn't be going against the ace of the opponent very often. But he's gotten a lot of press, and he's already a name out there. Julio Teheran for Atlanta, highly touted young right-hander, did not fare well his first trip through the majors, but everything he's done in the preseason has just been terrific. So there's guys out there that have some value. I think, the Miami pitching staff, I'm not a huge fan of Henderson Alvarez, but, Nate Eovaldi, Jacob Turner, you're very familiar with him being an ex-Tiger. They're playing in a pitcher's ballpark. They've got something to prove. Miami's players overall have a lot to prove. So I think as a team, we may see a little bit of an advantage on Miami coming into the season, as opposed to maybe Houston, who has to go to the tougher league. Miami's got a very good a very good minor league system, and with all the trades they made, they've got some pretty good players in there. So just because you don't know what the names are of these players does not mean that they're not very good. And one thing you do want to take a look at, when teams have been in Florida, they've been in Arizona for 5-6 weeks, then all of a sudden they're opening up in Chicago or Cleveland or Colorado where the weather is really bad. You're going to see some freaky things going on the first couple of weeks. So pay attention to that, and it's something that you don't want to overreact, because these guys have been in 80-degree temperatures, and all of a sudden they're playing in 40s and 50s. Obviously, your body's going to take some time to get used to that.
Question from Denver Money himself. What are your thoughts on the Kansas City Royals, and do you see James Shields leading them to the playoffs this season? And before Brian answers that, I actually have a friend of mine who he owns and manages a couple strip clubs, and he's really tight with some people really high up in the organization. When they had opening day here in Detroit a couple years ago, we had seats front row behind their dugout. He had the whole team autograph a ball for my little guy. And, he sent me a text the other day and said, what's the over-under on their wins? And he says he's willing to bet all of his strip clubs on the over from what he's hearing about, the team. And, everyone goes into the season hoping to God they don't lose. But when people within the organization, Oregon was my college bowl game of the year because I knew some people who had a son coaching at K-State. He flat out told his old man, there's no way we're going to be able to keep up with Oregon for 4 quarters. It's not inside information. It's just, he's not going to say that on SportsCenter, but he could be honest with people he knows. And, the organization, if you know someone, if they think they're going to suck or a mediocre year, they're not going to bullshit him. So that being said, I'm hearing real good things from people I know within the organization. Brian, what are your thoughts? And specifically per the question, your thoughts on James Shields?
Well, with Kansas City last year, they had no starting pitching at all. I love the Kansas City bullpen. They've got a lot of hard throwers in the bullpen. That's one thing I look at. It's hard to get hits off of a pitcher when you can't hit the ball in fair play. You strike out a lot. And Kansas City has a lot of flamethrowers in the bullpen. The last year, they had to go to the bullpen too often and too early. I think Shields is going to regress a little bit. He's put up a lot of innings over the last few years, but I like him there because he is going to eat up some innings, and he's a great leader from everything that I have read. So he's definitely going to help them out in 2 ways. I don't think his numbers will be nearly as good as they were in Tampa, but he's still going to be a positive for that team. But I still don't think, from a starter standpoint, that they're on that level yet. Jeremy Guthrie, you never know what you're going to get out of him. Irvin Santana has been very up and down over the years. Wade Davis was very good last year in long relief, but he's never really done much as a starter. Bruce Chen's another guy that, he'll get the ground balls, but he doesn't strike a lot of guys out. I do like Danny Duffy. Danny Duffy was a young pitcher with some talent, but he is going to start the year on the DL. But when he's probably your second best pitcher, at least in my regard, you still have a way to go. But the offense looks great. They've still got a lot of young players. They're going to score some runs. I've seen them many times down in Florida, or down in Arizona. They've got the best record in preseason baseball right now. Nobody could beat them. They're playing with a lot of confidence. Kansas City's a team right now playing in a division where Cleveland made some improvements, but their pitching staff is still horrendous. And Detroit's probably the best team in the American League. But Kansas City could go over that, but they're going to have to get something out of that starting pitching staff. But they've got some guys in the minors that they could call up as the season goes on, and that may be the guys that end up with the season in their pitching rotations.
Next question, Brian, is similar to college basketball, and you'll hear a lot, not across the board, but a lot of the professionals will say that the best time to kick the shit out of college basketball. And this goes back to the beginning of the webinar when I said, the odds makers are having to do basic numbers because they don't know enough about these obscure teams as much. And that's why even for a while, a lot of the bigger books, even like Pinnacle, were either lowering their limits or not putting up the totals so late in the day. And even got to the point that some of the books weren't even really putting up totals unless it was main teams, TV games, and didn't even put up most of the totals in general until conference play. So you see that there's a totally different animal prior to conference play and then when you get to conference play. So looking at baseball season, you're at spring training, the start of the season, every team is healthy. The weather is going to be different in different parts of the country than it is going to be later in the year or what have you. Some teams are maybe older. Other teams that maybe are the same age have a better farm system. Like all of these variables where what you have in the beginning of the year versus late in the year is going to be different. What would you say are some baseball betting tips that you would say have more importance in the beginning part of the season versus being used later? Not saying that these still can't be used, but like they have more value in the early months of the season. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's the same thing I use for other sports also. The teams that are getting all the hype early on in the season and in the preseason are teams I'm looking to bet against. I know when the Detroit Tigers are playing, everybody thinks Detroit's going to the World Series to the class of the American League. I'm going to look to play against them early in the season because even though I like this Detroit team, you're never going to get any value on a team at that point. You're going to get value on a team that nobody's talked about. Maybe a Boston Red Sox. Who we ever thought we'd see a time where we could get value on the New York Yankees? It's to the point right now where the teams that did a lot in the offseason are going to get a lot of hype. Cleveland's going to be an overhyped team coming into the season only because of their offense. They've done nothing to improve their pitching staff at all. One of the things I also like to use in baseball is if you follow baseball from a starting pitcher standpoint, many years you're going to find pitchers who have a good year followed by a bad year, or they've developed a certain pitch in the preseason and the off season, and a lot of people haven't talked about it. So you may see a journeyman player come out. He's normally a number 4, number 5 starter, and all of a sudden he's starting to win. He's pitching very well. Well, a lot of guys will have to go against him. Well, I can see why, but if you've read and you find out that, hey, he's picked up 2 mile an hour on his fastball, he's developed a slider this year, or something to that effect, you can get advantages on playing him early in the season because you know the teams that are playing are trying to win. It's not like the preseason here where people are just trying to get out of there and get to their golf outing. Once the season starts and he's putting up good numbers, you know for a fact at that point that you've got something you can bet on. As long as you know there's a reason for what he's doing early on is different from what it's been in the past.
In terms of weather, and baseball is one of the sports. I'm a Tigers homer. I love going to the games, as we were speaking before the webinar. But it's not like a college football where I'm going to watch every game and just be totally glued to the TV. So for me, I rely on information from other people, looking at the markets, or I'll look for certain variables. And weather to me is something that people don't really understand truly. And I've seen some sites and I've seen some sharp people on websites say things about weather that actually, wasn't really even accurate. And I can't remember what webinar it was on. There's a great book, even though it's not meant for gambling. I'd really suggest anyone who's betting baseball to get it and skim it and highlight all the parts that I'm about to say. But a guy named Robert Adair, he was a physics professor from Yale, wrote a book called The Physics of Baseball. And it's essentially the relationship of physics on the game. And he goes over a lot of things with humidity, air pressure, sea level. And, there's a lot of sites now that you could find that will literally show you which way the park's facing, where the wind's coming from, and have a timetable of the humidity and the wind and the direction throughout the game. And, just a couple quick interesting points that I found from the book is, here's one right here, for example, is, where's it at? For example, pitcher A with the same exact fastball would reach the catcher's mitt quicker in Denver versus the same everything in Yankee Stadium. In the event of being a pitcher who may use a curveball, he's better off playing in New York because in Denver, that same pitch will break on average 3 inches less due to the conditions. Experts in the field have estimated the infielder's range decreases a foot or so, and the outfielder's about 9 feet when you compare high elevation against a sea level ballpark. And, there's other things in regards to weather of, say, air density. The ball will travel further. With everything 100% equal except the air density, somebody hitting the ball in Denver, it goes 9% further versus being hit in New York. So if someone could hit the ball 400 feet in New York on average, it's going to go 436 feet when they're playing, at the Rockies. Some of the stuff is common knowledge, but the odds makers don't have time to break down the weather changes throughout the day. And being a season ticket holder to the Tigers, I've been at the games where you get there and you got your shades on and you're sweating your ball bag off and you got your cold Labatt Blue. And by the seventh inning, you're wishing you had a blanket, and it's a drastic change in the wind and the humidity and whatnot. And I've met some of these odds makers. These guys are like, some of them are real old, some of them are just using math. In terms of weather, Brian, is there anything that you do, or even if you don't do, that you've heard that you can, share with the people watching or listening now and in the archives in regards to weather that they could factor into their baseball handicapping?
Well, first off, I hope you get a kickback from that writer, because you've mentioned that many times. In fact, I went out and bought that book based on your recommendation, and it's not the easiest book to read. It's more of a mathematician's process, but yeah, it has a lot of great information in there. And a lot of what I do and what I look for is certain pitchers do certain things. Fly ball pitchers are going to have a lot more success in Oakland, San Diego, Anaheim in a night game than you're going to have in Colorado or Detroit or Chicago where the White Sox play. So one of the things I will look at is the home road play for each of these teams and how they do. Certain pitchers perform well in certain situations. And, like last year, San Diego had Clayton Richard was fantastic at home. But when he went on the road, being a fly ball pitcher, being a guy that didn't dominate from a strikeout standpoint, he would get hit hard. So your general baseball fan will look at that and say, oh, he's got a 3.5 run ERA. That's not bad. Well, when you consider at home it was a 3.07 or something, and on the road it was a 4, that's a big differential. A one-run differential is huge in Major League Baseball, and that's the kind of thing I take a look at. I want to know if a guy is going into Coors and he's a fly ball pitcher, especially if he's never pitched there before. That's not a guy I want to be backing.
And to be honest, I think you're being nice by saying it's a hard read. I would say that it's almost impossible to read, in my opinion. I mean, I bought it strictly because, in the gambling stuff, a lot of times it's regurgitated information or something that everybody else knows. So I try my best. And, even on Google, a lot of times you'll find these think pieces that colleges do or professors on sports and math or tendencies or whatever it is that most people don't know in the gambling world. And to me, that's an edge. And it is an impossible book to read. But, even if you get one or two things that put you on or off a game, it pays for the time it took for you to read it. And, it obviously saves you a bunch of money. So going into the baseball season, what are some general tips that you have for the people listening that maybe aren't, I don't want you to give away your secrets, but, people have their basic stuff of the bullpens or, try not always taking a home team on the run line because the obvious, they don't bat in the bottom of the ninth. What are some things that you, I guess, could share that won't hinder the edge you have over the odds makers?
Well, I made a listing of 5 things here that I think are a little bit undervalued, or maybe a lot of people don't know about them. One thing is the bullpen availability, which I talked about before. If you've got the situational left-hander coming out of the bullpen, I think was it Washington only has one left-hander in their bullpen this year, but I can't remember offhand. But when that guy has pitched 2 days in a row and he's throwing a good amount of pitches, they don't have anybody from that side to bring in. So it's something you want to keep track on. When you're taking a look at, for example, the power hitters from the opposing team, if the best hitter on the opposing team is a certain hitter from a certain side, and the guy that does well against him is not going to be playing, that's going to be a big edge that won't show up in your normal things that you read about. Another thing is the lefty-righty situations. You take a look at certain teams. For example, Jeff Keppinger just kills left-handed pitching. So when his team's on Tampa last year, the Chicago White Sox this year, when they're playing a left-handed pitcher, I know they're going to score more runs on average based on him being in the lineup than they will when he's not, when he's facing a right-hander, because he's got such an ability to hit left-handers compared to right-handers. He's going to be an everyday player from what I understand this year, although right now he's a little bit banged up, but he's expected to start the season. But you also have your home and away teams. Certain teams have their ballpark made for the home team. For example, I've never been to Minnesota and gone to the Dome Stadium, and I understand it was an ugly stadium to be in, and the new ballpark is beautiful. But that killed their home field advantage because that stadium was built on speed, and Minnesota stacked their team with defense and speed, and they had pitchers who pitched to contact. As soon as they moved outside, their entire home field advantage was gone. So you could make money in that situation by betting against Minnesota at home. So keep track of how teams do at home and on the road. And I kind of talked about this earlier with something else with the fly ball, ground ball pitchers in the stadiums. If you've got a guy who is pitching in a ballpark that is conductive to, you don't hit many home runs, you got a good defense behind him, he's a ground ball pitcher, you're not going to have to pay a lot of money to get this guy. He's going to be a bargain because he doesn't strike a lot of guys out. He pitches to contact, but he doesn't give up the home runs. So that's the kind of guy you can take some value on, like going by the stadium, and if he's a fly ball or ground ball pitcher. And one thing I always like to do is, I'm not a big favorite player when it comes to baseball anyway, but I like to go against big name pitchers when they're favorites, because normally you're going to be paying a higher price. And on the flip side of that, when you have two big name pitchers going against each other, there's a lot of competition involved in these games. And the team, or the underdog, he knows he's an underdog, but he's got a career. He's a veteran pitcher. He's been there before. I like to get those guys, especially going up against some young upstart pitchers that are getting a lot of press. You know, you find certain players every year that are just grind out wins each and every year, and they grind out money for their backers, but they don't have a big name, but they're able to win these games because they've been there before. We see that all the time.
Well, in terms of baseball in general, I know my Tigers are predicted to win, I think, at last check, the most games, like 92.5, and some other teams were at 92. Huge favorite to win their division, but they're like third or fourth favorite to win the World Series, which people don't understand gambling. And some of my friends were baffled by this, and I'm trying to explain, well, because the division sucks and they're going to pad, their season with a bunch of wins. Who are your thoughts on right now, if you had to bet everything you had, and I forced you to, Brian, no like him and Han on this one, who would you pick to win the World Series? And then who's your long shot?
I take the Washington Nationals. That's the deepest team in baseball. They've got 6 or 7 starters that could pitch for any other team. They've got guys in the minors who could literally start for other teams. If I was to take a long shot, I don't know what kind of a long shot it is, but I like the St. Louis Cardinals. They're a team that continues to win each and every year. They've gone through injuries, and they've been able to come back on the other side. And that's another team. Trevor Rosenthal is going to be in the bullpen, and this is a guy who could start for any other team in baseball. St. Louis has got a center fielder who's probably the number 1 prospect in baseball. He may not even make the team. As the year goes on, they're going to bring guys up. They're so loaded with minor leaguers that they can't even force their way into the lineup. That tells you how great of a team it is. And, the coaching's always been good. The organization's been very good. So I think it'll be Detroit and Washington in the World Series, but it wouldn't surprise me if St. Louis gets there. And I'm not big on long shots. I don't know if they're considered a long shot, but I know there's some value with the Cardinals right now.
I would definitely say it's for sure between a value and a long shot, so that's good enough for me. And anyone who listened to the last webinar, I don't want you to say, oh, he's repeating the same shit again. But what you just said on St. Louis to me is a key thing. They play so many games, and there was a guy who was a fan of Pregame. He worked for the Detroit Tigers. He did a lot of their West Coast operations in terms of like scouting and whatnot. And, we used to chat on instant message all the time. And he flat out told me, I don't remember if it was the year after or the second year after they made it to the World Series, when everybody had them pinned to win it all, and they ended up having a horrible year. Is he told me that they focused on the starting lineup and they gambled that if they stay healthy, they're going to the World Series. But if anything bad happens and guys start going down to injuries, they're essentially screwed because they have nobody good to pull up. And that year they had a lot of injuries, and they ended up just being a total disaster of a season. So what you just said about St. Louis, I couldn't agree with more, because I've seen it with my own eyes with the Tigers of being a good team, but you don't have anybody to bring up in the event things happen, you're in a shitload of trouble. Well, Brian, we went a little bit over it. I'm looking at the screen. Nobody logged out, so great information from you. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Brian is one of my favorite people at Pregame. I met him in person. He's a legit guy. He bets the games. He's a grinder. And I love doing the webinars with guys like Brian. And this is no disrespect to other people in the industry, and I would never say anyone's name intentionally. But I've met a lot of people in this industry, and, putting up some stuff that sounds smart when you can do it in front of your computer and take an hour to put 3 sentences together is one thing. But when you get guys like Brian or Dave or whoever on these webinars, and they're getting hit with these questions either real time as we're getting them on the chat module, or I'm coming up on them off the top of my head, and they're just like, boom, naming players, naming who their spring training guys are. They're the real deal. So I wanted to say, Brian, I really respect what you do, and any props you get from me are definitely well deserved. For anyone who listened and partake today, coupon code MLB10, MLB10, take $10 off any package or subscription in the next 72 hours. Brian, before we head out, is there anything you want to add?
I think that should do it. Just keep in mind the best way to approach baseball is to play underdogs with small favorites, especially early in the season. We saw that with Detroit last year. Everybody loved the Tigers, and as well as anybody, they came out really slow to start the season. And if you're betting $2 favorites to start the year, it can really put you in a hole.
I did a simulation one time where I took like a 500 or like 1,000 games, where one simulation you bet every single favorite, the other simulation you bet every single dog. I don't remember the exact math, but I believe you would lose your money like 4 times faster by blanket betting the favorites versus blanket. I mean, both ended up being negative, but with the dogs, you didn't lose it as quick. So without further ado, don't forget MLB 10 takes $10 off anything. Brian, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I appreciate everyone who joined us today. I'm Johnny Detroit. He's Bryan Leonard. This is Pregame.com. That's going to do it. Thanks for watching.